Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Calarian, and I'm here to report the institutional-based correction objectives to discuss about the institutional corrections, the global view on prison administration, prison antiquity to modernity, the influence of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope John Paul, the pro-life Pope, Walnut Street Jail, King Henry VIII, and King Edward VI, a jewel of King Henry VIII. What is institutional corrections? A prison refers to the penal establishment under the control of Bureau of Correction. Prison, also known as jail, detention center, penitentiary, correctional facilities. So, ang prison, kano, tibuok diri sa Pilipinas, kay under sila sa provision of Bureau of Correction. So, sila may gadala na. So, ang prison is also known as jail. Maura na sila jail, detention center, penitentiary, and correctional facilities. What is corrections? A branch of the CGS, the criminal justice system concerned with custody, supervision, rehabilitation of criminal offenders. So, kaning correction is branch or be part of the CGS, so criminal justice system. So, ikalima man ni siya, kalima nga pillar. So, iyahang kuan trabaho is to custody, to supervise, and to rehabilitate criminal offenders. Corrections. Corrections describes the punishment of the offenders for the crimes that they have committed. Corrections does not always mean punishment. In the United States, they expect their inmates to read Bible to reflect on their wrongdoings. So, ang correction daw is not always nga punishan ang mga piniriso. So, it's also their program nga kanang ila silang i-deter and ila ipa-reflect lang kaugalingon nga sayop ang ilang mga gibuhat. So, sa United States, ang ilaha is pabasahon nila Bible. So, mo sa ni ato sa Pilipinas. What is the purpose of correction? The main purpose of corrections in the criminal justice system is to punish offenders who commit any crimes. By punishing offenders, it will deter any offender from committing any more crimes. Corrections ensure that communities are safe. The fear of crime is reduced and it establishes the idea of getting treatment. So, ang main purpose sa corrections kay of course, panisyan jud ang mga kuan kining mga piniriso og ibutang silang nahuna nga sayop ang ilang mga gibuhat and aron ipakita nila aron makaamgo sila nga sayop ilang gibuhat og di nila dapat na usbon and to ensure the communities nga safe. So, kailangan sila ipriso para safe ang atong komunidad o mawala ang kadlok nila. Then, next is the correction agency is under a very high social expectation to produce a good citizen upon release. As agent of the law, the correction officer does not only have a simple responsibility of ensuring order in the facility but should, under the new paradigm, see to it that the released convict is reformed prison. So, mo na siya ang gadala sa jail, mga prisons, kay ang Bureau of Corrections. So, ilang gi-ensure nga inig-release nila sa piniriso or the convict is nagbago na, is ng new person, new reformed person. Corrections. Weakest pillar of the criminal justice system. Why correction is the weakest pillar in the criminal justice system? So, nganong gitinatawag siya weakest pillar? Because they fail to reform offenders and prevent them from returning to criminal life. So, based sa ilang mga ginaingon nga ang weakest pillar sa CGS is ang corrections. Kay ngano? Kay daghan manggon nga nakagawas na nga mga piniriso apan nagbalik-balik ra gyapon. Wala gyapon la mausob ang ilang ginabuhat. So mao na siya usa sa mga hinungdan nganong na weakest pillar ang correction. Global view on prison administration. Auburn model and Eastern State model. Auburn model. It is about punishing criminals, about otherwise known as retributive justice, the establishment of a prison model and regime designed to keep convicts separate and unable to communicate each other even as they were forced to labor as penal slaves. So kaning Auburn model daw kay more on kuha ni siya punishing system. So ginapanishan jud may maybe kuan physical punishment like nana and then na kuan na sab ilahang kuan dere nauso na sab ang slave. This model provides tiny individual cells and workshops as well a rigid system of enforced silence and harsh punishments. Accordingly, movement to and from the workshops was performed in a regimented manner, known as lockstep, which called for the prisoner to march a military-style human chain. So kani nga model is nauso ang kuan kining system nga mao to mga harsh punishments and kini pong ilahang natawag og lockstep. So before sila mukaon or moadto sa lugar dapat maglakaw sila nga inani nga style na maglinya. Eastern State model on the other side and the more humane way of the Eastern State model, which is about having people in controlled setting and using space in humane way, otherwise known as the restorative approach. So ang kani siya is lahi na siya sa sa Auburn model kay ang Auburn model kay kuan man siya kanang harsh ra kay ang punishment. So ang kaning Eastern State model kini kay kuan siya kanang more on restorative approach. So more in gina-reform ang tawo pero dili pinagi sa harsh punishment. Eastern State model. The Eastern State model believes that crime is the result of environment and the solitude will make the criminal grateful and penitent. Hence, penitentiary. This would not only punish but move the criminal towards spiritual reflection and change. So, mao ang ingon ganiya nga state model is to reform a person. So, sa pinagi sa pag-reform is aside sa punishment is gina-reflect through spiritual like kuan reading Bibles ana. Eastern State model. It is early reforms inmates were hooded whenever they were outside of their cells to prevent distraction, knowledge of the building and all interactions. This correction theory would be known as Pennsylvania system. So kaning ila is kuan kanang style silang prison is tagsa-tagsa mura siya sa usa ka room dapat usa ra ka tawo. The prison, which is an important part of the justice system, is a reliable indicator of how well a society defines itself. The condition of the prison will therefore be in the core of any discourse on inmate rehabilitation and correction. Rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is used and understood from the Christian approach to prisoner rehabilitation program, which uses prayer and spiritual transformation so that the prisoners who have been released will not have the tendency to be brought back again. So, rehabilitation, so pag-rehab sa mga offenders o sa mga piniriso. Pero kani kay pinaagi sa ilang pag-rehab is using prayer. Pag-ampo o kining spiritual transformation is pag-reflect sa kagalingon kanang magbasa og Bible. So kini usa ni sa makatabang para mabutang silang hunahuna nga sayop dila mga gibuhat og di nila usbon para di na sila makabalik sa prisuhan. Rehabilitation, continuation. Prisoners that are into the faith-based rehabilitation program want the inmates to explore their faith more deeply and encouraged to indulge in daily prayer and worship. So, mo tong ingon, basa sila Bible. So, o pag-ampo para bag-o sila. In 2018, the Philippines held the sixth highest prison population out of 21 Asian countries as of 2019. The Philippine population rested at 108.31 million people, and 215,000 of those people were incarcerated. Therefore, the Philippines has an incarceration rate of about 200 per 100,000 citizens. So ang Philippines jud is usa sa mga kinadaghanan, no? Top 6 sila sa Asia. So grabe ang pag-boom sa pagsaka sa mga kuan prison population sa Pilipinas. So kini siya is tungod ani usa ni sa mga result is kaning overcrowding na. There are 933 prisons running in the Philippines. Unfortunately, they are mismanaged and overcrowded. Below are 5 important facts about the incarceration system in the Philippines. So, maugingon ganiya nga tungod top 6 good. So, expected overcrowded kay limit ra itong facilities dili kita dagag mga jails apan dagan tong mga piniriso. So ma-overcrowded jud. So ang result sa overcrowded is daghang mga epekto usa na ang health sa tawo. 5 facts of Philippines incarceration system. Severe overcrowding. Rodrigo Duterte won the presidential election in 2016. He promised to end crime within 6 months. This promise also included the killing of 10 of thousands of criminals. Duterte's election led to the infamous war on drugs and eventually overcrowded prisoners. In Manila City Jail, the largest jail in the Philippines, is split into dorms that safely house 170 inmates. So, severe overcrowding. So, as I said ganiha nga ma-overcrowd jud ang mga tao labi na tong kuan sa termino ni Rodrigo Duterte kay more on kuan iya sa programa sa iyahang plataporma is war on drugs. So daghan jud nadakpan nga mga drug lords ay mga drug users, drug pushers. So usa sa mga nagpadaghan no sa na overcrowd ang prisuhan. Currently, these dorms house around 500 people. Similarly, a room designated for 30 people holds about 130 in the Quezon City Jail. This severe overcrowding prison leads to illness and deaths in the thousands. So, mao jud, no? Atong ang effect sa overcrowding is ang health. So, kuan daghan na kayong mga piniriso. So, lead to illness like makatakod-takod na ang mga kung may magsakit, dali na kayo maka-spread. So, sa kani nga panahon is daghang kuan nga matay. Pre-trial detained. According to the World Prison Brief, 75.1% of incarceration within the Philippines incarceration system are pre-trial, and 2018 141,422 of 188,278 prisoners were pre-trial detainees. Fortunately, many people are serving sentences without conviction. Pre-trial detention is one of the judicial system all over the world. In countries like the Philippines, many people serve time that outweighs their crimes. On average, prisoners in the Philippines are detained for 9 months without being sentenced. Next is high death tolls. About 5,200 inmates die annually, and the New Bilibid Prison (NBP). According to Ernesto Tamayo, the hospital medical chief, these deaths are due to overcrowding, dirty living conditions, and inmate violence. And a 2019 Philippines Senate hearing, Tamayo said that there were uncontrollable outbreaks of pulmonary tuberculosis. In addition to overcrowding, poor living conditions, and inmate violence, NBP lacks nutritional food and basic health care. So, mao ni ang time ano nga kuan sa termino ni Duterte, tanan siyang gipang-kill, and also pod kanang gipang priso nga mga drug pushers, mo mga facts sa incarceration system. So the other is the corruption. So kini jud nag-exist jud siya sa kuan halos man di lang sa gobyerno pod. So in September 2018, the public learned that the woman has told her husband sentence would be shortened if she paid 50,000 pesos. Later that year, senators stated that inmates could live like kings for a fee. This information led to further allegations. Prison workers and officials were taking bribes to bring and distribute contraband to inmates. So, sa correction is kuan, nag-exist pud ang corruption kay labi na yung mga prisoner nga mga dato kanang di sila ganahan nga na mag-suffer maayo gani sa prison kay balo ka basta prisuhan is tanang king samo kay dito then lisod kistanan. So bayaran nila ang kuan kay mga nigbantay or kining mga guards. So like like the inmates could live like kings, so para bulib sila ayahay is dapat na ibayad. So ni tawag og bribery. So corruption mo ni other term sa corruption. What are major jails in the Philippines? So mga jails sa Philippines is New Bilibid Prison, Davao Prison and Penal Farm, Cebu Provincial Detention and Rehabilitation Center, the Correctional Institution for Women, Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm, South Cotabato Rehabilitation and Detention Center, Manila City Jail. So first is New Bilibid Prison. New Bilibid Prison or NBP is the Muntinlupa, Metro Manila is the main insular penitentiary designed to house the prison population of the Philippines. It is maintained by the Bureau of Corrections under the Department of Justice. As of November 2021, the NBP housed 28,545 inmates, which exceeds its ideal capacity of 6,000. So kani nga Bilibid mo ni sa pinakadako nga prisohan sa Pilipinas. So kani siya kay naglocate sa Muntinlupa o kini sa mga numbers of inmates is 28,545. So asa ka na 28,000 ka inmates, so daghan kistanan niya ang kapasidad sa New Bilibid Prison is only 6,435. So grabe ang pagka overcrowd sa New Bilibid Prison. Davao Prison and Penal Farm. Formerly, the Davao Penal Colony was established on January 21, 1932 in Panabo City, Davao del Norte, Philippines. It has a land area of 30,000 hectares with a prison reservation of 8,000 hectares. During World War II, the Davao Penal Colony was the biggest prison establishment in the country, which was used by the Japanese invading army as their imperial garrison. So ang Davao Prison is nag-locate sa special Davao del Norte, Philippines. So dako-dako siya is 30,000 hectares. So pag World War II, usanis mga gituyo ning gituyo ni og tukod kay tungod sa mga Japanese invading army sa unang panahon. Cebu Provincial Detention Center, Detention and Rehabilitation Center, or CPDRC, or other known as the Dancing Inmates. CPDRC is a prison in Cebu Province, Philippines. It is a maximum security prison facility with a capacity of 1,600 inmates. CPDRC dancing inmates, or the CPDRC dancers, in the collective of prison inmates in Cebu Provincial Detention and Rehabilitation Center, a maximum security prison in Cebu. So, usa sa mga maximum security nga prisuhan. So, ang nakanindot diri nga prisuhan is kining ilang mga inmates diri is manayaw. So, naghatag sila entertain sa mga tawo. Correctional Institution for Women. The Correctional Institution for Women, or CRW, is a women's prison located in Mandaluyong, Metro Manila, Philippines. The prison is operated by the Bureau of Corrections. The prison first opened on an 18-hectare 44-acre property on February 14, 1931. Previously, women were held at the Old Bilibid prison. So, kining correction institution for women. So, kani nga prison is for women jud. So, naa jud sila kuan kanang prisuhan nga pang babae. Kaya di man pwede nga itipon sa mga panglalaki nga prisuhan. So, kini kay nalocate sa Mandaluyong, Manila, and kini sa una is kini mga women kay gibutan ni sila sa old prison, pero karon na sila ilahang nga institution jud, nga correctional institution. Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm. Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm in Puerto Princesa City, Palawan, Philippines is one of the 7 operating units of the Bureau of Corrections. Under the Department of Justice, as of 2021, the majority of inmates in the Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm in the Philippines were confined in a minimum security. Of all the inmates in the prison facility, only 490 were confined in maximum security. So, kini Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm is kanina locate sa western part of the Philippines, Palawan, so sa Puerto Princesa. Then niyot kini ilang program diri no kay na sila ang ilahang mga piniriso diri is i-engage nila og kanyang farm, no? Mananom sila na mangisda na. South Cotabato Rehabilitation and Detention Center. South Cotabato Jail is one of the most overcrowded prisons in the world. Murderers, rapists, drug dealers, and the guilty and the innocent are all behind bars together in a jail designed for 600 prisoners. More than 2,000 inmates are crammed into cells the size of shoe boxes. So, no, South Cotabato ang usa daw sa mga pinakadaghang nga prisoners, no? So, now overcrowded sila. So, ang usa ka cell is designed for 600. Then ang capacity sa cell is only 600 prisoners. So, pero ang sulod di ay sa sobras kadaghan is 2,000 inmates na. So, mura sinardinas na sa sulod. Manila City Jail. The Manila City Jail, popularly known as the Old Bilibid Prison, is a detention center in Manila, Philippines. The jail is one of the most overcrowded in the world. So, pareha po din sila sa South Cotabato. The Manila City Jail currently accommodates close to 5,000 prisoners who are classified by law as detention prisoners, city prisoners, and the youth offenders. So, we'll go to prisons antiquity to modernity. So, sa una, the history of prisons could be as old as the human history. The need of man to come up with an exacting punishment has caused the evolution of prison. The Catholic Encyclopedia gives a detailed narration of the history of prisons. Accordingly, many jurisconsults and religious scholars include imprisonment among the number of penalties recognized in Hebrew legislation. So, sa unang panahon, na na kuan naapoy juris o mo ni sila kanang kung pare karon mga kung nasa ining nas korte pre na nga juris consults, so naapo na ila sa una. Then the number of penalties recognized in Hebrew legislation, so naapo sila ilahang batas, no, like pareha sa ato karon nga nag-exist. It is believed that during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, there were at least 3 prisons in Jerusalem. So, si Nebuchadnezzar is nagtukod, no, nga there are all at least 3 prison sa Jerusalem, which is the Jerusalem, Greek of Athens, ug sa Rome. On about this period, in the Greek city of Athens, imprisonment was imposed as a penalty. In fact, prisoners were deprived of freedom, movement, or by having their feet attached to wooden blocks. So, sa Greek city of Athens, ang ilang style is, so, did you ka kuan kana did you ka kalakaw-lakaw kay gibutngan man og wooden blocks ang tiil. Then sa Rome, prisoners were enclosed in the upper chamber, lighted only by narrow loopholes, and if they were condemned to death, they were thrown into the dungeon through an opening in its roof, strangulation. So, mao din ni ang Rome style sa ilang prisuhan. So, naay lungag sa taas. So, imo ma-imagine nga grabe kainit ang kasulod. Today's prison, just like some today's prisons then serve to be the punishment places where offenders either suffer their sentence for life or for a specific period of time, depending on the gravity of their offense. So, mao ni karon sa ato ang prison kanang na sa una is kung unsa ka bugaton imong sala, mao pod ilang i-punish like harsh punishment. So ang kani kung bugat kag sala pod, so presohon ra ka. So pero it takes it depends sa pila ka years na imong bayaran. History of prison. From the birth of modern civilization in 3rd millennia BC, almost every major ancient civilization used concept of prisons as a mean to detain and remove personal freedoms of incarcerated people. So, mao ni siya. In those early periods of history, prisons were often to use as a temporary stopgap before sentencing to death or life slavery. But as time went on and our civilization developed, prisons started morphing into correctional facilities that started implementing the concept of rehabilitation and reform prisoners. History of prison. In addition of holding convicted or suspected criminals, prisons were often used for holding political prisoners, enemies of the state, and prisoners of war. So, sa unang panahon, kanang ang prison kay moni ang di lang sa pagpriso sa mga sa suspected criminals, but also moni siya diri sa gipriso ang mga kontra, no, sa unang panahon may kontra mga dayo di like priso o labi na sa mga prisoners of war, so like mga militaries sa kontra di ay priso. The earliest records of prisons come from the 1st millennia BC, located on the areas of the mighty ancient civilization of Mesopotamia and Egypt. During these times, prisoners were almost always stationed in the underground dungeons where guilty or suspected criminals spent their life either awaiting death sentence or the command to become slaves. Exception from that rule comes from the home of the modern democracy, Greece. Their prisoners were held in a poorly isolated buildings where they are often to be visited by their friends and family. Primary source of their detention were not dungeons, high walls, or bars, but simple wooden blocks that were attached on their feet. So, mo nilang style, no? Wala sulod sa prisuhan, wala sulod sa bars. So, ang ila is simple gilak ang ilang mga tiil by wooden blocks. So, ancient Roman Empire, however, continued use harsher methods. Their prisons they built almost inclusively underground, with tight and claustrophobic passageways and cells. Prisoners themselves were held either in simple cells or chained to the walls, for life or for time. History of prisons. Continuation. As slavery was accepted from norm in those days, majority of prisoners that were not sentenced to death were sold as slaves or used by the Roman government as workforce. One of the most famous uses for the slaves in Roman Empire was as gladiators. In addition to fighting in the arena, sometimes after a lifetime or training on the special gladiator training houses, many slaves were tasked as support workforce that enabled smoother run of the popular gladiator business. So, sa unang panahon, ang mga piniriso kay gitrained no para sa ilang business nga gladiator. Kining gladiator is mura ni siya kanang as a entertainment no kanang mag-away ang mga piniriso inang ipaaway like inana. History of prisons. Continuation. The conditions in the European prisons remained harsh until English royalty started being more involved with their justice system. Henry II commissioned the deconstruction of first prison in 1100s together with the first draft of English legal system that used concept of jury. One of the most historic prison legislation was introduced in 1215 when King John signed Magna Carta which stated that no man could be imprisoned without trial. History of prison. With the rise of the industry between 16th and 18th century, English prisons became overcrowded and the new penal measures started being implemented. Military pardon and penal transportations during the end of 18th century. Over 50,000 prisoners were transported from England to penal colonies in North America and Australia. So nausod jud ang kwan diri no. So unang panahon daan ang pag overcrowded dili ra day karon nga nay mag-overcrowd sa una ra day ni pod. So ngano naka-overcrowd ani is ilang mga prisoner sa kuan prisoners of war o uban pa nga mga piniriso. History of prisons. France even continued their practice of penal colonies until the middle of 20th century, most notably in French Guiana and its infamous prison Devil's Island, and Russia also used remote penal colonies in the frozen northeast Siberia. The age of modern prisons that we know today started with the several prisons reforms in 19th century England. During that time, prisoners started receiving more care. Concept of rehabilitation was introduced in governments around the world, especially in UK and US, started reconsidering their views on solitary confinement, which was primary source of the increased numbers of insane, suicidal, and catatonic prisoners. Wars that engulfed in the world in the beginning of 20th century brought the formation of large amounts of war prison camps and concentration camps. So mao ni sila no mga prisoners of war. Most famous examples of those types of prisons happened during World War II, when Nazi government formed over 300 detention centers in which political opponents, Jews, gypsies, criminals, and others were detained without judicial process. So kani nga panahon no wala kani sa Nazi government kay na start sa pag priso sa mga tao is without judicial process. So largo ra dito ra no ni dakop sa piniriso is detain na largo. Majority of them was eventually killed on an unprecedented massive scale that is today estimated to be between 11 and 17 million people. So imagine dana kadagan gipang patay sa Nazi government, 11 million and 7 million people. So walay kaluoy mga Nazi government na dagan na nga among ani nga pangtabo. During the end of 20th century, modern prison system was finalized. Concept of probation service was introduced in 1991, and 3 years before that, the first prison intended solely for the holding of inmates in permanent isolation was formed. So, kani nga parang pag 20th century kay kuan unang nauso na ang mga cell nani mga isolation cell like kuan concept tawag og probation service. Those supermax prisons became widespread across the entire United States, with over 40 of them being active in the year of 2005. Inmates in those prisons were held in the 20 hours long periods of cell isolation with occasional communal yard time, work, education programs, and meals in cafeteria. So, kini nga panahon no na gitukod na ang kuan supermax prisons kay tungod sa kadagan na tungod sa overcrowded na daghan na kay mga tawo, daghan na kay mga prisoners. Kailangan sila magtukod og dako nga facility. As of 2006, it is estimated that over 9 million people are imprisoned worldwide, with the United States leading in the rate of incarceration. So anong panahon kinadaghang piniriso is the United States. The religion's role in prison. Religion's value in prison is often about its contribution to the individual growth or development of a particular inmate. The focus is to perceive role of religion in helping lower the chances of recidivism among inmates. Other reasons, it focuses on the immediate value that religions have for inmates through their help in their coping and survival. The influence and practice of religion in the correctional setting is as old as the history of prisons. Initial entry of religion into prison was probably carried out by religious men who themselves were imprisoned. The Bible stories of such prisoners include Joseph and Jeremiah in the Old Testament and John the Baptist, Peter, John, and Paul in the New Testament. So, dako kay katabang ning Bible no sa mga piniriso kay tungod ani kay maka-reflect silang kaugalingon nga sayop ang ilang mga gipangbuhat dayon ang Bible maghatag og siya kanang lessons God nga mga good behavior sa usa ka tawo. So through ani ma-reform ang prisoner. then na become a better person na. Beginning in the days of Constantine, the early Christian church granted asylum or criminals who would otherwise have been mutilated or killed. Although this custom was restricted in most countries by the 15th century, releasing prisoners during Easter time and requests by the church and authorities to pardon or reduce sentences for offenders remained for centuries, with the latter still in existence in a modified form. Imprisonment under church jurisdiction became a substitute for the corporal or capital punishment. In medieval times, the Roman Catholic Church developed penal techniques later used by secular states, such as the monastic cell that served as a punishment place for criminal offenders. So, sa unang panahon, kanang naay kuan style sa imprisonment, like ano tawag ni monastic cell nga prison. So kani siya is gamay ra ni siya nga lugar igo, pero os ka tawo rin ang maka-occupy ani. So mao ni siya used by secular states such as monastic cell. So diri sila maginulsol, diri sila magbasa-basa og mga Bible, diri sila magampo. Mao siya monastic cell. In 1593, the Protestants of Amsterdam built a house of correction for women and one for men in 1603. In Rome, what are now the Sisters of the Good Shepherd built correctional facilities for women, and in 1703, Pope Clement XI built the famous Michel Prison as a house of correction for younger offenders, with separation, silence, work, and prayer emphasized. As late as the 18th century, the Vatican prison still served as the model prison designed for Europe and America. So kani nga prison is for ano lang, so for women and for young offenders, like mga bata, mga teenage mga bata. Early settlers of North America brought with them the customs and common laws of England, including the pillory, the stocks, and the whipping post. So ang ilang pagpunish no exist ani nga time, which is the whipping post. So kani bunalan ka like ani nga picture, kani siya is gibunalan ang criminal offender, kani gihigtan ng kamot sa post. During the 18th century, isolating offenders from fellow prisoners became the accepted correctional practice. It was thought that long-term isolation combined with an in-depth discussion with clergy would lead inmates to repent or become penitent, sorry for these sins. Thus, the term penitentiary was derived. West Jersey and Pennsylvania Quakers were primarily responsible for many of the prison reforms. They developed the idea of substituting imprisonment for corporal punishment and combining the idea of the prison with the workhouse. Thus, the term penitentiary was derived. West Jersey and Pennsylvania Quakers were primarily responsible for many of the prison reforms they developed. The prototype of this regime was the Walnut Street Jail in Philadelphia, that in style reflected the Quakers' belief in man's ability to reform through reflection and remorse. So, diri sa Pennsylvania, ang ilang pangalan ay sa Philadelphia, ang ilang pangalan sa prison is the Walnut Street Jail. Walnut Street Prison, behind Old Gold. What has been called the first American penitentiary, if not the first one in the world, was established in Philadelphia in 1790. In the Walnut Street Jail, a building formerly operated as a city jail. So, mo daw ni ang pinakaunang prison sa US. O dili, pinakaunang prison nga na-establish yes sa US in Philadelphia in 1790 ug usa po ni sa kaunang American penitentiary. Even during the 19th century, when daytime work was initiated by the Auburn system, solitary confinement at night was still the norm in correctional practice. The forced solitary confinement was thought to serve the same repenting purpose as older penitentiary. So, pag 19th century was initiated by the Auburn system. So, ang ilang style sa kaning ilang cell is just like monastic. So, magtag sa per cell. Belief in education as a tool for reducing criminal activity also assisted in the growth of religion in prison. Because of the limited budgets of correctional institutions, chaplains were often called upon to be the sole educator in the American prisons. The schooling often consisted in the chaplain standing in a dark corridor with a lantern hanging from the cell bars while extolling the virtues of repentance. So kani nga time is naanay chaplain. So ang chaplain is like kuan siya kani mga pastor no. Kani sila moy ti kuan enlightened sa mga prisoners. So kaning mga chaplains is kuan kanang nitabang ni sa mga prisoner para magbag-o sila. So kuan ni sila kanang religious base ni sila kanang nagamit og kuan mga faith based like Bibles inana. Volunteers also have a long history in corrections that can be traced back to the beginning of prisons. In the at least in the last 200 years, many religious groups have entered correctional facilities to provide religious services in inmates. So daghang mga volunteers na aside sa mga chaplains, dapat mga volunteers nga mosulod sa prison para motabang sa mga prisoners. One of the most famous advocates for volunteers in correction was Maud Bollington Boat, the daughter-in-law of William Booth, who founded the Salvation Army. Today, volunteers are vital to religious programs, and without them, inmate participation would surely be limited. Faith representatives would be unable to minister the large number and variety of inmates. So, kini siya si Maud Bollington Boat, usa sa ka famous nga ni mga volunteers nga tig-advocate sa mga prisoners. Many older correctional institutions are being refurbished or destroyed, replaced with facilities designed for better observation and security. Yet the initial influence of religion on the philosophy and the design of the penitentiary will surely remain in correctional history. The influence of Roman Catholic Church. The role that the Roman Catholic Church played in the history of prisons was one that may be considered as a necessary role it has to play. It was response to the imprisonment of Christians because of their faith. Thus, it was naturally that when Christians were being hunted down and cast into jail for their faith, and church should recommend the faithful to visit the prisoners. So, dako kay influensya ang Roman Catholic Church kay ang mga prisoners kay labi na sa katong mga Christians nga prisoners mao'y nagkuan mao'y nagpasiugda mao'y naghatag og maayong balita sa Bible. The deacons and deaconesses, which specially charge with the care of the incarcerated Christians, bringing them the comfort of religion, food, clothing, and especially money, which was needed to procure certain mitigation, even liberty. So, deacons, mo na sila mga pare nga kuan or pope nga mo sulod sa prisuhan, maghatag og advice, magwali dito sa sulod para matabangan ang mga prisoners sa ilahang pag-reform. What is diacons and diaconesses? The diacons is a member of the diaconate, an office of Christian churches that is generally associated with service of some kind but which varies among theological and denominational tradition. So, mo na sila mga diacons. First is the Indulgia Paschalis and Edict of Valentinian I, open presence that Easter the prisoners set free. The privilege was however not extended to those arrested for sacrilege, poisoning, treason, adultery, and other serious crime. The second is the right of asylum. Under Constantine, the Catholic Church had the right of asylum, which was granted also by successors. Constantine was Roman emperor from 306 to 337, well known for being the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. So, siya mo'y kinaunang Roman emperor, si Constantine nga ni-convert into Christianity. Accordingly, Charlemagne ordained in a capitulary that no one taking refuge in church should be taken from it by force, but should be unmolested until the court and pronounce its decision. Charlemagne or Charles the Great was the emperor of the Carolingian Empire. So, mao na si Charlemagne. Asa ni sa mga naka-influence sa Roman Catholic. Today, the stand of the Church has become complete reversal of this past. It was the present staunchly pro-life Pope John Paul II who reversed this culture of death. Through this encyclical Tertium Millennio Adveniente, he formally apologized to the past tolerance and use of violence in the defense of truth. So si Pope John Paul mo'y pioneered no, mo'y nag-una, mo'y kuan nag nagmando nga walaon ang kuan kaning labi na kaning death penalty, walaon ang culture sa death penalty. In Evangelium Vitae, Pope John Paul II has challenged each and every one of us to break away from the culture that especially the treatment of killings as solution of the problem. So matud pa ni Pope John Paul nga kuan dili solusyon ang death penalty sa kuan sa problema sa kriminalidad. No, so iyang gipangusgan nga walaon ang death penalty kay kuan yet because we are a religious no we are a religious person, so life is very important. So di dapat nato ni ikuan sensayon ra og like patyon ang tawo na he calls us to reject the following. So mo ni yang gipang reject: death penalty, population control that resorts to abortion and use of contraceptives that are artificial and abortifacient, euthanasia or mercy killing of the elderly, the terminally ill, the infirm, the handicap of the case of mercy killing or dying with dignity. So mao ni siya mga ipang-reject ni Pope John Paul. Galley slavery. From about the middle of the 14th century until the beginning of the 19th century, galley slavery was imposed as punishment, although this practice existed long ago in ancient Rome and Greece. So sa unang panahon na uso ang galley slavery. So makita niyo sa picture kani mga mo ni mga prisoners nga nagbugsay. So mo ni ang mga example sa galley slavery. Force niya forced slavery. So mao ni long time ago pa pag kani mga ancient Rome or Greece. Convicted criminals were chained and marched to the ships where they were stayed to or the ship for the duration of their sentences, but in many cases their punishment is for life. By the 1350, galley slaves were also branded so that if they happened to escape, they would be easily detected and restored to their galley chains. So, mao ni sila ang mga prisoners nga sagaran ani nila is for lifetime na ilang slavery. King Henry VIII. Henry VIII is normally depicted in history books as the large man of Tudor dress sporting a beard. When we think of Henry, we see the dissolution of Catholic Church, one of his largest royal actions. England decreed corporal punishment for vagrants in 1531 and penal slavery in 1547 to defend the interests of the still dominant landlord class where the nobility gets their privileged status in society. So mao ni ang mga asawa ni King Henry Globia, six wives. The one man six wives: Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr. So first, Edward the so Monacy Edward the Sixth, a jewel king of Henry the Eighth, born on October 12, 1537 to July 6, 1553. Edward the Sixth was crowned at the age of 9, with no maturity to lead his kingdom from the front, and the Regency Council was set up to assist his rule. It was during Edward's rule that Protestantism acquired a bigger hold over Catholicism in England. Edward the Sixth recognized his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, as an heir to the throne, which was not accepted by the privy to the throne, which was not accepted, and declared Mary, his Catholic successor, to bear the crown. Edward was born to King Henry VIII and his third wife, Jane Seymour. Henry VIII broke up with both his wives, and he also executed his second wife under adultery for only reason that she not bear him a son. The king and the kingdom was wishing for a male heir to the throne, and the long wait is over on October 12, 1537, when Edward was born. So si Edward the Sixth is mauni siya ang anak na laki ni King Henry VIII. So grabe ka terror ni Henry VIII kay ang una niyang wife, nagibiyan niyang unang wife kay di siya kaanak og lalaki. So nangasawa siya kaduha, iya pong gipatay kay dili kaanak og lalaki. Not until sa pagkatulong nga iyang asawa nga si Jane Seymour, nakaanak sila laki, ang pangalan kay si Edward the Sixth. Edward grew up lavishly with the lady mistresses taking care of him until the age of 6. Henry was particular of bringing him very neatly, and he insisted upon the security and cleanliness to be maintained in his son's room. Henry VIII considered Edward as one of the precious gifts and he had got and could not afford to lose it. So according to Henry, Edward the First, which is ang iyang anak, is one of the precious gifts sa iyang nga iyang nadawat og dili ni siya mapalit or mabayaran kung mawala ni siya. Henry passed away on 28 January 28, 1547, leaving a will that his 9-year-old son should succeed him. After 40 years of England witnessing no coronation, Edward was crowned at Westminster Abbey on February 20, 1547. The coronation took place 4 days after Henry's burial. So, pagkamatay ni burial namilit sa term na kanang namanamilit si King Henry nga iyang anak, which is the 9-year-old son, would be the king mo'y mo dala sa ilahang kanang trono, mo'y mo sunod sa iyang trono. Because Edward was not old enough to be monarch of England, Henry's will demanded an appointment 16 executors to assist Edward till he was 18 years old. Kay bata pa man si Edward, so kailangan pa siya mga experiences. So nag-appoint siya mga 16 executors para matabangan si Edward. But Edward's uncle Edward Seymour proclaimed himself to be the Lord Protector of the kingdom and looked over the authority for 2 years starting 1547. Even though it led to controversy, Edward Seymour was supported by 13 out of 16 executors in making him the land protector. Edward believed in the faith of Protestantism. He didn't want his half-sister Mary to ascend to the throne with the fear that Mary would restore Catholicism in England. So he removed both his half-sister Mary and Elizabeth from the line of succession. So kani si Edward, so dili ni siya kana Catholic. So kuan ni siya kana iyang mga half-sister kay iyang gi-remove sa line of succession kay madlok siya nga kung malingkod ang iyang mga sister sa trono basig i-restore ang Catholicism sa England. Edward VI died on July 6, 1553 and was buried in Henry VIII Lady Chapel at Lady Chapel at Westminster Abbey. It started with fever and cold heats worsened during the next few months. At least last public appearance was on July 1, 1553. Conclusion: the primitive times, the form of punishment was so barbaric and ruthless, and there is no other form of penalty except death, either by means of flogging, beating, drowning, or being thrown into the jungle, which is infested by wild animals. But in the modern trend, the corrections, all of these forms of punishment is only a thing of the past. So, sa unang panahon kay mga harsh punishment, not until nga karon na develop na usab na ang ilang pamaagi sa punishment. So, di na siya harsh karon kay kuan hindi na paagi sa mga death penalty like inana. So karon more on nag-agad ra sa years, no, na depende sa years of imprisonment, depende sa kabug-aton sa iyang sala. So that's all for today. Thank you and have a good day.